The Texas sun beat down, hot and unforgiving, on James Carver. His face, tanned and weathered, showed the many miles he'd ridden. Dust coated his worn hat and the shoulders of his denim jacket. His horse, a sturdy bay named Ranger, looked just as tired. They had been on the trail for days, just him and Ranger, with only the wide-open land for company. James was a drifter, a cowboy who moved from place to place, never settling down. He'd seen a lot, done a lot, and learned to be tough. Life on the trail made a man hard like old leather. Now, though, his throat was dry and Ranger needed a drink. Up ahead, a small wisp of smoke curled into the sky. It was a lonely little farm, tucked away in the vastness. It looked quiet, peaceful even, with a small house and a few sheds. James nudged Ranger forward, hoping to find a well or a pump. He wasn't looking for trouble, just water. As they drew closer, the farm seemed to wake up a little. A dog barked, a low, rumbling sound at first, then a sharper yap. A woman stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes with a hand. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, and she watched him with a steady gaze. Two small figures, children, peeked from behind her skirt. James could tell right away she was a woman who stood her ground. He reined Ranger to a stop, a respectful distance from the house. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a little rough from disuse and thirst. "My apologies for disturbing you. We're just looking for water. My horse and I are parched." He kept his hands in plain sight, wanting to show he meant no harm. The woman's eyes, though, still held a hint of worry, like a mother bird protecting her nest. James Carver, a drifter cowboy, rode up to a quiet Texas farm needing water. The woman, Eleanor Price, stood on her porch, her gaze firm but wary. She was a widow, James sensed, raising her children alone in this vast, often harsh land. Her eyes, though cautious, also held a deep tiredness, the kind that comes from facing the world without a partner. "Water, you say?" Eleanor's voice was soft but clear, like a cool stream. "There's a well out back by the old oak. You can water your horse there." She pointed with a gentle nod of her head, not moving from her spot on the porch. The two small children, a boy and a girl, still peeked from behind her, their eyes wide and curious, much like little deer. James thanked her and led Ranger to the well. The water was cold and sweet, a welcome relief. After Ranger had drunk his fill, James pumped some into a tin cup for himself. He could feel Eleanor's eyes on him the whole time, not unkindly, but certainly watching his every move. It was the careful watchfulness of someone who had learned to rely only on herself. When he returned to the front of the house, cup in hand, Eleanor had not moved. "Thank you, ma'am," James said, taking a long drink. The water tasted better than anything he'd had in days. "That's good water." Eleanor gave a small nod. "It's all we've got." Her voice held a note of pride, but also a hint of the hard work it took to keep such a place going. "My name is Eleanor Price." "James Carver," he replied, tipping his hat. "Much obliged, Mrs. Price." He knew he should be moving on, but something in her quiet strength and the sight of the little ones made him pause. He was used to lonely roads, but this farm, with its small family, felt even lonelier. He wondered how long it had been since she had a helping hand. He also wondered what had made her so guarded. It was clear she trusted no one easily, and for good reason, out here on the edge of nowhere. James Carver, after thanking Eleanor for the water, felt a pull to linger. He wasn't one to stick around, but the quiet strength of the widow and her two little ones stirred something in him. He knew he should ride on, but his feet stayed put. "Mrs. Price," he began, "I noticed your fences could use a bit of mending. I'm handy with tools if you'd allow me to help for a spell, just to pay for the water." "Oh, that—" Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. She was used to fending for herself, and offers of help were rare, often coming with a price she couldn't afford. "We manage," she said, her voice firm. But then she looked at her children, who were now peeking more openly, their small faces curious. The boy, perhaps 5 years old, had a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and the girl, a bit younger, clutched a worn rag doll. James didn't push, he just nodded. "Well, if you change your mind," he offered, turning to leave. As he did, his gaze swept over the small, tidy living room, visible through the open door. It was sparse but clean, with simple wooden furniture. And then he saw it. Tucked away in a shadowy corner, almost hidden by a faded sheet, was a piano. It was old, dark wood, covered in a thick layer of dust. Several of its ivory keys were missing, and others lay at odd angles broken. It looked forgotten, a sad, silent thing that had once brought joy. James, who had heard many a tune in smoky saloons and around crackling campfires, felt a pang. A broken piano in a lonely house. Elinor followed his gaze. A shadow crossed her face, a fleeting look of pain. "That old thing," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "It hasn't made a sound in years, not since." She didn't finish the sentence, but James understood. Not since her husband had passed. The piano was a memory, a ghost of happier times. He knew that feeling well, the weight of things left behind. Even though Elinor had said no to help with the fences, James found himself riding back to the farm that evening. He told himself it was to make sure Ranger was rested, but his eyes kept going to the house, to the corner where the piano sat. Elinor was surprised to see him again, but didn't send him away. She offered him a simple supper of beans and cornbread, which he ate by the warmth of a small fire outside. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery colors, James quietly walked into the living room. He carried a small saddlebag of tools, the kind a cowboy keeps for fixing just about anything. Elinor watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, her children now asleep in their beds. He didn't ask her permission, just went straight to the dusty piano. He gently pulled away the faded sheet, revealing more of the instrument's sad state. He ran a calloused finger over a broken key. "This old thing," he mumbled, more to himself than to her, "it's got good bones." Over the next few evenings, James made the farm his temporary home. He still slept under the stars, but after supper he would go inside. Elinor would sit in her rocking chair, pretending to mend clothes, but her eyes never left him. James worked slowly, carefully. He found bits of wood in the barn, whittling them down to size with his knife. He straightened bent wires and found clever ways to replace missing parts with pieces he pulled from his saddlebag, a bit of old leather, a thin strip of metal, even a sturdy piece of twine. He didn't make much noise, just the soft scrape of wood, the gentle click of a tool, and the occasional hum when he tried to fit a piece just right. The children, when they were awake, would sometimes creep to the doorway, watching with wide, silent eyes, curious about the man who was bringing life back to the quietest thing in their home. Elinor's guard didn't fully drop, but the sharp edges of her wariness softened. She saw the care in his big, rough hands, how he treated the broken piano as if it were something precious. Slowly, piece by painstaking piece, the old piano began to look like it might play again. On the fifth evening, James put down his tools. He stepped back from the piano, wiping his hands on a rag. The instrument, though still old, looked whole again. The keys were all in place, polished as best he could make them. Elinor, who had been watching from her chair, slowly rose and walked closer, her eyes fixed on the piano. The children, drawn by the quiet change, crept out from their bedroom, their bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The little girl, Sarah, was the bravest. She looked at the piano, then at James, then at her mother. Her eyes, usually so shy, were full of wonder. She reached out a tiny finger, hesitant at first, then gently pressed one of the white keys. A clear, sweet note rang out. It was a single sound, but it filled the small house, pushing away the years of silence. Sarah gasped, a tiny sound of surprise and joy. Her brother, Thomas, giggled and clapped his hands. Elinor stood frozen for a moment, listening to that single, perfect note. Her breath hitched in her throat. Memories, long buried, rose to the surface. She remembered her husband's strong hands playing tunes, filling this very room with laughter and song. She remembered dancing with him, the children still babies in her arms, to the music of this piano. Then, as Sarah pressed another key and another, making a simple, jumbled tune, Elinor felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't known in so long, a mix of happiness and sorrow, of loss and hope. Tears welled up in her eyes, not sad tears, but soft, gentle tears that ran down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. For the first time in years, the house was alive with music, and Elinor's heart, too, felt a flicker of life she thought had gone for good. James watched her, a quiet smile on his face. He knew then that some things were worth stopping for. The music from the piano, a simple, joyful sound made by Sarah's small fingers, had changed everything. Aliner's tears were a silent thank you, a bridge built between her guarded heart and James's quiet kindness. Now the house felt lighter, less lonely. James saw it in Aliner's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. He knew then he couldn't just ride off, not yet. He started finding reasons to stay. "That fence line by the creek looks a little weak, Mrs. Price," he'd say over breakfast, a meal she now shared with him at the small kitchen table. "Wouldn't want your cattle wandering off." And without waiting for an answer, he'd head out, hammer and wire in hand. Aliner didn't argue anymore. She'd just watch him go, a small, thoughtful smile playing on her lips. He worked hard from sunup to sundown. He fixed the wobbly gate, shored up the sagging roof on the chicken coop, and even helped her mend a broken plow. He taught Thomas how to carry water buckets without spilling and showed Sarah how to feed the chickens, gently, so they wouldn't get scared. He wasn't just fixing things, he was becoming a part of the farm's daily rhythm. He'd rise before dawn, tend to Ranger, then help Aliner with the morning chores. He'd eat lunch with them, often listening to Sarah try to play a simple tune on the piano, now a central, joyful sound in the house. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, James would sometimes sit on the porch with Aliner. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was comfortable, not empty. Days turned into a week, then two. James, the drifter, was no longer drifting. He was rooted, for the first time in a long time, to this little farm and the family in it. He even found himself humming along to the children's piano playing, a soft, tuneless sound that surprised even himself. The work was hard, but it felt good, a different kind of good than the freedom of the open trail. It felt like purpose. Moved by the music and the family, James found a new purpose in helping Aliner with her farm. His days were now filled with mending fences, tending to the livestock, and teaching the children small chores. He ate with them, shared quiet evenings on the porch, and even hummed along to Sarah's piano practice. The farm. The whispers had started in town. When Aliner went to the general store for supplies, she heard it. "That drifter still out at the Price place?" One woman would ask another, not bothering to lower her voice. "Staying a mighty long time for just water, wouldn't you say?" Another would nod, her eyes full of judgment. Aliner would just hold her head high and pay for her goods, but the words stung. She knew what people thought, how quickly they judged a woman alone. James saw the change in her, too. Her shoulders seemed a little heavier after a trip to town, her smile less free. He knew his presence was causing talk, making things harder for her. He was a drifter, he always had been. It was time to move on for her sake. The thought was like a cold wind blowing through his own heart, but he knew it was the right thing to do. One morning after a quiet breakfast, James walked out to the barn. He saddled Ranger slowly, carefully checking the straps. He took his time, putting his tools back in his saddlebag, making sure everything was ready for the trail. He knew Aliner was watching him from the kitchen window. The children, sensing the change in the air, were unusually quiet. He led Ranger to the front of the house. Aliner was waiting on the porch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Sarah and Thomas stood beside her, their faces sad. "Well, Mrs. Price," James said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be, "it looks like I've fixed just about everything that needs fixing around here. Time for me to ride on." Aliner nodded, her eyes downcast. She took a deep breath. "James," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at him, and he saw the sadness, but also a flicker of something else, something brave. "Before you go," she continued, would you play one last song on the piano for the children?" Her gaze drifted to the instrument, now shining in the morning light, a symbol of the quiet joy he had brought back to their home. Aliner's request hung in the air, a soft plea that tugged at James's heart. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw past the widow's guardedness to the brave, kind woman beneath. He saw the light in her children's eyes, a light he had helped to rekindle. The thought of riding away, of leaving this place and these people, felt wrong, like tearing a piece of himself away. He dismounted Ranger, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked past Alina and the children into the house, their eyes following his every step. He didn't sit at the piano. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he carefully took out a simple silver ring. It wasn't fancy, just a plain band, but it held all the hope and promise he carried in his heart. He placed the ring gently on the polished wood of the piano, right on the middle C key. The silver gleamed against the ivory. Then he turned to face Alina, who had followed him to the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning understanding. The children peeked from behind her, silent once more. "Alina," James said, his voice deep and steady, no longer rough from the trail, "I'm no musician. My hands are better at fixing fences than playing tunes." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But I reckon I could learn if you'd let me." He looked at the ring, then back at her. "This drifter," he continued, a small, hopeful smile touching his lips, "he's tired of drifting. He's found his home." He stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Alina Price," he said softly, looking into her eyes, "will you let me stay for good? Will you let me be a father to your children and a partner to you in this life?" Alina's breath hitched. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of shock and overwhelming emotion, looked from the ring to James's earnest face. The silence stretched, broken only by the gentle ticking of a clock and the faraway chirping of crickets. Then, a slow, radiant smile spread across her face, chasing away the last shadows of loneliness. "Yes, James," she whispered, her voice thick with tears of joy. "Yes, please stay."